We live today in a moment that will be the subject of study for decades, if not centuries to come. I recently came to this realization when looking in the newspaper, when talking to friends and colleagues and students, and hearing the things that they had to say and reading the things that we had to say about what's going on now with a pandemic, with the political tumult and the divisiveness, the bitterness, and the big question marks that we have today in terms of where we're going and what the future holds, both distant and near. I do in my work archival research. I do historical research. I go into old libraries and look at old documents for clues about what kind of things preceded major moments of change. So when we think about what the world did after World War II, when the countries came together and said, we cannot afford to have another war, we need to do something to come together and have an agreement about how we can live in peace and security. And what came out of that was the United Nations. What came out of that was the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. What came out of that were the covenants on international, political, civil rights, social, cultural rights. And what I notice about those moments that precede those major rights transformations is things look pretty crazy. There are a lot of problems that begin proliferating out of control until people are able to figure out how to corral those problems together under a covering rubric, under a set of basic principles that will permit a people to address the problems, not one by one, but collectively. Human rights was one of those things that the countries of the world decided was one of those covering rubrics. Instead of dealing with all the problems one by one, if we have a schedule of universal human rights, we can look to the idea of human rights, two words, but a huge concept that covers a broad swath of the issues that people were facing, both at home and in the international context as well. So I began by saying that we today live in a moment that will be studied for decades and centuries to come. We live in a moment where there is a proliferation of problems that we know are problems, but we don't know how we're going to deal with them. I was teaching a seminar yesterday, and my students, extraordinarily smart, they are excellent at issue spotting. They are excellent at identifying what a problem is and extracting it from the quote unquote wild and bringing it into our seminar, our lab, so we can look at it. And I gave them a challenge. We all sat together. This is on Zoom, so we all sat together in our own homes. But the challenge was 5 minutes for all of us to write down as many problems that we can think of. Problems that need to be addressed, but we don't necessarily have the knowledge, the tools, or the agreement about how to figure out how to address those problems. So we did that. I'm going to share the screen here just for a moment and offer you, let's see, here we go, share screen. There it is. So I just want to take a look at this, and hopefully you can all see that. I'm going to go to full screen mode. Okay, there we are. So in 5 minutes, the 15 of us came up with 126 problems. Now, I don't want you to necessarily read every single one of these. That's not the point. But the problems range from privacy rights, civil asset forfeiture, invasive species, the war on drugs, and so on and so forth. What I want you to focus on, though, is what I have at the heading here. This is what I refer to as the problem of problems. That is, we have too many problems right now to deal with one by one. We have to figure out how we corral them together and define what these problems are, such that we are fighting these problems on one front or two fronts, not on 126 fronts. I would like you in the audience to think about this and to think about what problems are most important to you and how we might fight not only those problems, but problems that are important to the people who are living with you, the people with whom you agree with and the people with whom you disagree with. Is there a covering rubric that will allow us to all together at once focus on the nature of our problems and move in the same direction with respect to those problems all at once? That's what we need right now. And in my research, that is precisely what allowed a people in a moment of tumult when they were suffering from this problem of problems to move forward into a new era that solved the problems and addressed them in the way in which they would want to live in a future like that. Thank you.